Hello and welcome to the garden. So in the previous video I was in the polytunnel. I gave that a bit of a tidy up and weeded in there. Then I planted some garlic and chicory. Well, really it's more of the same in this video, but now I'm in the greenhouses. There's not an awful lot going on in the greenhouses. The vines here are, well, they're just shedding their leaves, or at least this one is. This is Black Hamburg, and these leaves have turned a most beautiful colour and they are falling all over the place. The muscat in the other greenhouse, that's always a bit slower, so those leaves are still, well, they're just starting to turn a little bit yellow now. But these won't be touched until sometime in the winter, when all the leaves have fallen, because I don't want to prune these until this wood is fully ripe and the sap's no longer rising. And then I can prune these with minimal bleeding, because vines are quite prone to bleeding when you prune them if the sap is still flowing. So I will leave these until we're in proper winter to prune these, and then there'll be little to no bleeding then. The bleeding's not a massive issue. It's unlikely to cause serious harm to the vine, but I'd much rather leave this and do it when it's properly dormant. So I've got in here, I've still got a few peppers, and well, we may have had a touch of frost outdoors. If we did, it was only the lightest touch of frost the other week. But these plants, of course, under cover, they're not going to be affected yet. It will need a much harder frost for that. They're obviously not growing now. It's too cold for them. They don't like it. But I've got one or two fruits on there that are trying to ripen. I can see a couple have gone yellow, and there are a couple of green ones left. So I'll leave maybe 2 of those plants in place. The rest of them need to come out. And sadly, I need to get rid of the marigolds. They have been absolutely amazing this year. And they're even better in the other greenhouse. I have had to hack these back where they've been getting in the way of the pepper plants, but they've just flowered profusely from midsummer right the way through, and these would just keep going until the weather takes them out in some weeks' time. But yeah, they've been absolutely stunning. I'm not sure what I'm going to do in here next year, because they do get a little bit too big. Maybe some of the smaller tagetes would be better in here. I'm not sure. But these marigolds, they are wonderful, but they are quite big plants, and they kind of get in the way of the peppers. Maybe I'll put some along the border here instead. There's a bit more room here. They probably won't bother the peaches too much. The peaches are looking very sad now. These are just getting ready to drop their leaves. But they've all been pruned and tied in some time ago, so there's nothing to do with these. So one thing I'm not very good at, to be honest, is sorting out the greenhouses and the polytunnel for winter growing. I mean, we have these primarily for the tomatoes, which is that's our most important crop, and also then the peppers and chilies. That's why we've got the undercover spaces. But what I really ought to do is have these jam-packed with winter greens, and I'm pretty poor at doing that. As you can see, there's really nothing in here. Now, I do have some plants ready, or some of them are ready, but they're not great, and they should have been in here weeks ago. I mean, they're not big enough. I lost a batch of seedlings somehow the cabbage whites managed to find their way into the little greenhouse where I had the seedlings, and they laid all over them, and I did my best to pick off. First of all, I rubbed off as many eggs as I could find, and then I picked off as many of the caterpillars, but basically they wiped out a whole batch of seedlings. And the re-sowing, well, that was getting a little bit late, and you know, temperatures are lower now, stuff's not really growing very much. So I do have some oriental greens, and I have some winter lettuce. The winter lettuce is odd. Some of the plants are really small, and some of them are okay for putting out, I think, but none of it's particularly impressive. And these greenhouses should already be filled with those plants, growing away nicely, because at this time of year, growth is going to be incredibly slow. But with a bit of luck, they will overwinter, and maybe I'll get a flush of growth in the spring, or late winter and into spring, just before they then go to seed. And obviously they'll be cleared out by May in time to plant the tomatoes and peppers. But yeah, anyway, that is the plan. First job though is to move out the winter squash. Well, as you can see, we've eaten one tray of winter squash already, but we've still got most of them left. These have been in here in the dry, allowing those skins to cure and harden up. And these are pretty solid now. And yeah, they're looking good. So I need to get those out of here, and I'm going to move those into our garage. It's a lot more airy and it's less damp in the garage than in the sheds here, so I think that will be a better place for these. So a few weeks ago I started these French grey shallots in these deep cells. Now you can see that one or two of them have some top growth on them. I wasn't sure whether I would be seeing this year even, because they are quite slow for the top growth to show up. I've got one here that is not looking good. That's got mould on it, and I think this one is going to be a failure. But the others, they're not looking too bad. That one looks a little dodgy too, but we'll see how they go. This tray, okay, there's one with a hint of green, but they look pretty inactive until you tip the tray up. And I don't know if that will show up on the camera, but you can see there's tons of roots in here now, and that is why I gave these such deep cells, because this will be completely filled with roots. And again on this one, and in fact most of those have some roots. Nothing much here. Oh no, there's some root. So it looks like most, if not all of those, are going to come good. Even these that don't show any sign of green on top yet. Well, actually, yeah, there you go. There's a root, and I'm sure it's also true with these others. Can't see anything there yet. Oh, there's a root there. So I think the majority of these are going to grow okay. I'm not watering them too much now. They haven't been watered for a little while, but the soil is still damp in here, and because of the weather it's going to stay fairly damp, so I'm just going to leave those alone. But I have so many of these bulbs saved from this year's crop that I am very tempted to set out another couple of trays. So I might do that today. Well, in a similar vein, I was very disappointed to see these broad beans, or lack of broad beans. So I can't remember when I put these in, but I'd rather expected to see some growth here by now, and it was old seed, and I was starting to think that that seed was no longer viable. Doesn't look promising at the top. However, just as with the shallots, it's always worth taking a look underneath, and there we go. These strong roots of the broad bean plants, and again I've got these in the deep cells because they will really appreciate that, and these form such great root systems. But as you can see, most of these cells have germinated, and I think that's almost certainly the case with this other tray as well. Yeah, not all of them, but quite a few, and certainly more than enough for what I want. Now, some of those seeds were a little bit dodgy, so there are a few there that I didn't expect to germinate, maybe half a dozen, but it looks like these are actually well on their way, and we should be seeing the top growth emerge fairly soon, I would think. There's a slight crack in the top of the soil here, and that's usually a sign that a shoot is pushing its way up. No, it's not there yet, but the roots are coming, so I'm sure the top growth will appear fairly soon. So that's quite a relief. So I've got two more of these deep trays, so I might as well make use of them. And I've gone through this process on a previous video, so I won't dwell overly long on it. All I'm going to do is just fill this up. This is it's a fairly light compost mix, so I will firm that down nicely in a moment. Right, so I'll just firm these cells a little bit, and then I'll top that back up. It's lumpy, bumpy, fluffy compost. It's not nice to work with, but the shallots will not care. Brush the worst of the junk off of the top. Just firm those a little again. Right, that is now perfect. So this is my stock of small bulbs. So these aren't so convenient in the kitchen, but they are good for planting. The smaller bulbs, they tend to divide into fewer offsets. This is something I've talked about on several previous videos. And because they divide into fewer offsets, you tend to get bigger bulbs from them the following year. So the French grey shallot, the bulbs do tend to be a little bit on the small side, and they do tend to produce rather a lot of them. So I only really want to plant modest sized bulbs. I don't want to plant any of the large ones. Those are better used in the kitchen. So I'm just going to trim that slightly. These have a very tapered bulb, and the point of it is just up here. You can feel that. So I don't want to cut this too short, but that's just about right. So I'll just trim up a few of these, and I'm just picking out those that are particularly firm. Most of these are okay. There will be a few soft ones in here, inevitably. That one I don't like. Now all I want to do is just push them into the top of the soil. If I were planting in the ground, I would set these so that just the tip of this is above the soil, but in these cells I just want to push them in a little bit, leave lots of depth there for the roots to grow, just far enough for that bulb to stay in place. Now it's quite late to be starting these, but it doesn't really matter because these are saved bulbs. These are a free crop for me. I can use them or not later on as I please. And if I don't want to plant them for full-sized shallots, I can always set them out fairly close together. Just take the young growth as you might a spring onion. There's nothing wrong with that. The top growth is very nice. And if you like the grey shallot, it is well worth saving your own bulbs. You get to pick the size that you prefer, and importantly, these are really expensive to buy. I'm always amazed at how much companies are charging. Quite a lot for just a handful of bulbs. So with this shallot, perhaps more than any of the others, saving your own is a good idea. So these will be some weeks behind the other trays. It doesn't matter, they can sit here in the greenhouse until late winter, I expect, when I will move them outdoors. Late winter or early spring. Probably at the start of March, I would think. That's probably a sensible time to put them in the ground. But I'll keep an eye on them, see how they're going. I don't want them to get too bound up in these cells, so if they're moving along nicely, I'll put them out a little sooner, weather depending, of course. So that's one tray finished, and I do have a second tray spare, so I think I will plant that up as well. And yeah, this is going to be, once again, too many alliums. I've already got tons of garlic in, I've got ordinary shallots and some overwintering onions, but we do get through a lot, and every year I think I've planted far too many, and well, usually I have, but we do get through them. So yeah, I will find somewhere for these to go, and if nothing else, I will cut the young green growth to use earlier in the season when the other stuff isn't ready yet. So I'll find a use for it. Well, sadly it's time to say goodbye to the marigolds here. There's lots of seed heads. I dare say I will get some volunteers next spring, but also some old pepper plants. Oh, it's a little green pepper, I'll keep that. That one's not good. These have already been pruned back. There's just the one fruit left on that. And yeah, that one's all right. Well, my peppers have done fairly well this year, I think. In the smaller greenhouse, where I have the chilies and the smaller fruited peppers, they were fantastic. I was pulling tons of fruit out of there, basketfuls every week during the season, and yeah, that was really great. In the greenhouses here, it's been a slightly different story. I have the larger fruited sorts in here. they take longer to develop good sized fruit, and then the fruit takes a lot longer to ripen. So I don't expect these to crop so readily as the smaller fruited sorts. Now, I've grown these varieties many times before. So I had the Quadrato d'Asti, the red and yellow sorts. And then I've had the Bull's Horn, the Corno di Toro type, again red and yellow. And well, I've grown the Asti peppers for many years, and they have produced in the past fairly good sized fruits, sometimes really rather large, and they're very well flavoured. It's a lovely pepper. So I'm not really criticising that variety. I do like it. This year, however, they were a bit disappointing. The plants were a little bit disappointing. They were quite squat. The fruits were small to medium, certainly no large fruits. And I don't think there were as many of them as I would like to see. The Bull's Horn peppers, though, they have done a lot better. Now, of course, this has been a fairly challenging season in a lot of ways. The weather hasn't always been particularly nice, and maybe they just didn't like the conditions, because they have done better for me in the past. These, however, have done great. I mean, they are, what, 6.5 feet tall, which is pretty good. Actually taller if these broken bits were still attached. And they were cropping really well. You can see I've still got some large fruit on here. These green ones at this stage, I mean, it's mid-November, there's very little chance, I think, of those ripening, but even so, I can take those fruit. They're perfectly good. I will leave them here and see what happens, but I don't really expect those to ripen. There are a couple on these other plants that have turned. I'll take this fruit straight away. It's just about ripe, and I will use that this evening. That's a fantastic pepper. It's a good size. It's rock hard, and these are very tasty. So I'm not sure why these have performed so much better this year, but I've been sufficiently impressed with the difference between them that I think next year I might just stick with the Bull's Horn peppers. I planted up the gap here between the tomatoes and the peppers. This year I had French beans and other stuff down the centre. I think next year I probably won't do that, because these plants get a fairly good size. I've got just enough room as they are to sneak down here and tend the tomatoes. They won't get in each other's way too much. So I think next year, just the Bull's Horn peppers, and probably no planting down the centre. And yeah, we'll see how they do next year. Well, I'm going to leave those peppers where they are. I will plant around them. Now it's just a case of giving this a good weeding, getting the worst of this out. Well, it's pretty much the same situation in the second greenhouse. I've got the Muscat grape just starting to go over now. There's quite a lot of growth on that. That should have been cut back earlier. It's secondary growth, and also the figs need quite a bit of pruning. My excuse for this poor state of affairs is that we had lots of pots of potatoes in the pathway, so I couldn't get to them. That's the excuse I'm using anyway. And there's no sense in pruning those figs now. I will leave those until they're also dormant, and I'll prune this lot in the winter. And then I've got peppers and more of the marigolds to clear out. I think if anything, they've flowered even better in here, but it's time I got these out and some new stuff in. So I'm going to crack on and clear this greenhouse. Again, 1 or 2 pepper plants may remain. I can just see at the end there are a few green fruits, and at least one of them showing just a hint of colour. If we're really lucky, that one might just ripen this year. I hope so. I'm not that keen on green peppers, I must confess, at least not these. There are a few green fruits that I think are a little more palatable, at least to my taste, but I'm not a huge fan of these when they're green. I'm going to use them, of course, because I have them, but with a bit of luck, 1 or 2 might yet ripen, depending on the weather. So I'm not going to film this, I'm just going to pull these plants out, give this a good weeding, get it ready for planting. And I think I will plant this in part 2 of this video, because I have waffled on for quite a long time in this video already and delayed the process by planting up yet more of the grey shallots. So I will come back with a second video when I'm ready to plant this up. So that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.